My hair is so bad. Ugh. Quarantine. It's a look. We're gonna go with it. Hi, YouTube. My name is Jack. And today I want to talk about something that at first glance probably seems very simple, very basic, maybe even a little facile, but I think is really worth discussing. And that's trying to define what Wicca is. Um, and the main reason that I want to have this conversation is that there isn't really like a universally accepted standard definition. And that has resulted in a lot of, I think, confusion and sort of unnecessary arguments in various, mostly online spaces. Because there are a lot of people who sort of have an idea in their heads of what Wicca is. And let's be honest, it's often a negative idea, right? It often has negative connotations, this image of what they think Wicca is. And because of that, I think there are a lot of people who want to distance themselves from Wicca um, because of things that they think Wicca is, that, at least to my mind as a Wiccan practitioner, are not part of sort of the basic essential structure of Wicca. So I want to talk through the sort of basic elements of what I think constitutes Wicca, with the understanding that Wicca is a highly fluid religion. There's a great deal of diversity within Wicca. So this basic structure, I think, is fairly common in Wicca, fairly universal, but there's always going to be variation. There are always going to be people who call themselves Wiccan who don't meet one or more of these criteria. There are also always going to be people who import other things into their magical practice, their magical and religious practice. On top of these basic tenets I described, there will be individuals or groups that bring other things in and modify this structure in various ways, and those things still count as Wicca. I'm really just trying to describe sort of the basic skeleton. And secondly, sort of on the other end of things, Wicca is just a word. And even if you meet all of these criteria that I am about to describe, if you don't want to call yourself Wiccan, if you don't want to think of yourself Wiccan, you certainly don't have to, right? I'm not trying to impose a rigid sort of categorization on anyone else's practice. I'm just sharing my perspective as an individual practitioner on sort of what I think the basic components of Wicca are. And when I look at something, sort of the rules by which I gauge whether it feels like Wicca to me. Um, and the first thing is Wicca is a form of witchcraft. Right? Wicca is not the only form of witchcraft. There are plenty of other forms of witchcraft, and Wicca is no more or less legitimate than those, but Wicca is fundamentally and inescapably witchcraft. Wiccans are witches, and part of what that means is that Wicca involves spell work. Wicca involves casting spells and doing magic of various forms. Um, Secondly, Wicca is a Neopagan religious form of witchcraft. So it's not just casting spells, there is also a religious element to it, which may be construed in a variety of ways, right? Wicca is defined much more by practice than by any sort of prescribed belief. It's about showing up and doing the rituals. But the rituals in Wicca will tend to have a religious component to them. As opposed to just showing up and casting a spell and then leaving. Whether that religious component is deity veneration, whether it's sort of more of a Jungian archetypal, engagement with your own unconscious, that's sort of open to interpretation, open to personal practice, but there is some kind of a religious element and structure to most things that I would consider Wicca. Thirdly, Wicca is built upon some kind of a veneration of polarity in nature. And classically, this was understood as sort of a divine feminine, divine masculine, right? A very sort of binary gendered thing. Wicca tends to reflect the development of social understanding in society at large. And as mainstream society continues to sort of break down assumptions about binary gender and the relationship between gender and sex, Wicca is having those same conversations. So Wiccan practitioners may understand the polarity of sort of their religious worship in a variety of ways, including very non-gendered things. Um, I personally, I just had a couple of blog posts about this. One of the main relationships that I personally understand between my gods is this idea of sort of the Kabbalistic relationship between force and form, which is not necessarily a gendered thing. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But regardless, in some way, there is polarity of some kind baked into at least a lot of Wiccan practice. I would venture to go so far as to say most Wiccan practice. Um, this is one where, there are going to be people, Dianic Wiccans, for example, who might disagree with that and quibble with that. So I don't want to push too hard on that point. But I think it's at least common enough, pervasive enough that it warrants mention. The third thing is Wicca is structured around a wheel of the year with 8 Sabbats at the solstices, the equinoxes, and the midpoints in between them. That is a Wiccan invention. It's a distinctly Wiccan creation. And to my mind, right, like, if you're Wiccan, you probably observe the Wheel of the Year with 8 Sabbats. And if you're observing the Wheel of the Year with 8 Sabbats, then your practice, regardless of what else you have going on, is at least in that respect strongly influenced by Wicca. There are people who observe the Wheel of the Year who don't call themselves Wiccans. It's totally fine. But that ritual structure, that ritual calendar of the Wheel of the Year in that way, is something that comes straight out of Wicca historically. Next thing I would say is sort of the quartered circle. So Wiccan ritual often takes place in a magical circle that is constructed ritually and that marks the 4 cardinal directions as sort of important places, either with candles or a bowl of stones or whatever, right? A crystal or something. But Wiccan ritual space tends to be designed around this idea of a circle that's quartered with the 4 directions, and usually those 4 directions are associated with the 4 elements, air, fire, water, earth, which also sort of factor into the main sort of magical and religious framework of a lot of Wiccan ritual practice, magical observance, and so on. So, and that's kind of it as far as defining Wicca goes, right? It's a form of witchcraft. It's a religious form of witchcraft. There's some kind of a polarity. There's an 8-fold wheel of the year. There's a quartered circle, and it involves the elements. That, to me, is the essence of what Wicca is. And anything else is not essentially or fundamentally Wiccan. Right? I'm a Gardnerian Wiccan, so I belong to a particular tradition of Wicca that is defined by other hallmarks, including an initiatory lineage. But I reside in the United States, where Gardnerian Wicca is not the only kind of Wicca. There are a lot of other Wiccans, both Wiccan traditions and sort of solitary eclectic practitioners. And so I don't consider those sort of Gardnerian specific things to be necessary conditions for all of Wicca, right? And I think that there are a lot of things that people have sort of associated with Wicca over time that aren't necessarily sort of part of the basic structure of what Wicca is, that aren't part of the foundation. So in particular, right, you think about conversations about like Wicca is problematic because Wiccans use a lot of sort of new age, new thought ideology, and that, at least to my mind, understanding that I am not authoritative and I do not speak for all of Wicca, I don't consider that fundamentally Wiccan. I don't consider that part of the essence of what Wicca is. And there will be people who disagree with me, but for me, it really is just those 6 features, and that's kind of it. And then everything else is confetti, right? Everything else is you can build on that basic foundation and personalize Wicca and form a Wiccan practice or a Wiccan tradition or whatever that has other features and that feels right for you in whatever way. But to me, so those are all and only the things that I consider defining features of Wicca. So I want to be really clear here that I'm not trying to sort of gatekeep. I'm not trying to prevent anyone from using the term Wicca to describe their practice if they don't meet all 6 of these criteria. I'm also not trying to force anyone to use the term Wicca if they do meet all of these criteria and they don't want to consider themselves Wiccan. But this is just sort of my personal perspective on like what Wicca is. And I think a lot of the time, when various conversations happen about Wicca and its relationship to other kinds of witchcraft or, other kinds of magic, um, a lot of the time I end up confused because I feel like other people are using a definition of Wicca that doesn't look like my own. And I think people can sort of end up talking past each other because they're not working with shared foundational definitions. So that's all I have for this video. I'm going to sign off here so it doesn't get too long. For those of you who are down south and experiencing this terrible blizzard, I hope that you are all safe and well, and I will talk to you at some point soon.